Hi everybody, let's continue our discussion of extremity trauma from Bailey and Love. Now moving on to the treatment of a fracture by its location. A fracture may be a diaphyseal fracture or a metaphyseal fracture. A metaphyseal fracture having intra-articular components or an extra-articular fracture with no intra-articular involvement. So the treatment will be different for each type of a fracture. Coming to the diaphyseal fractures are fracture of the shaft of a bone. Diaphysis means shaft. Diaphyseal fractures are extra-articular fractures. They don't have anything to do with the intra-articular area, with the joint. They are extra-articular fractures, and as we have already discussed that in extra-articular fractures we only need mechanical alignment. We only need to restore mechanical alignment. So mechanical restoration is only our goal. And mechanical restoration is achieved by correction of length, alignment and restoration. Length, alignment and restoration. And we don't need exact anatomic reduction, which is achieved in intra-articular fractures. So extra-articular fractures don't need exact anatomic reduction, only mechanical restoration is achieved by correction of length, alignment and restoration. Length, alignment and restoration. Diaphyseal fractures are usually treated with intramedullary fixation techniques like intramedullary nails. Okay, coming on to the summary box. Diaphyseal fractures. In diaphyseal fractures, we restore length, alignment and rotation. Length, alignment and rotation. And a consideration is given to the fact that whether we want to have primary or secondary bone healing. In diaphyseal fractures, we usually want to have secondary bone healing because callus is not an issue there. And in intra-articular fractures, if we have massive or a large callus, then it may interfere with the movement of the joint. So in intra-articular components, in intra-articular fractures, we don't want excessive callus. So we want to have primary bone healing where callus is minimum, and in this way we want rigid stable fixation in intra-articular fractures to achieve primary bone healing which don't have any callus. So coming to the metaphyseal fractures. Metaphyseal fractures can be intra-articular or extra-articular. For example, this is distal end of tibia, and if fracture occurs at this level, it is extra-articular because it is not involving any part of the joint. Joint surface is this. Joint surface is this. So it is not involving any articular surface. It is extra-articular. And if fracture line is like this, it is partial articular because it is involving some part of the articular surface. It is partial articular. And if the fracture is like this, it is complete articular because it is complete intra-articular because this joint surface, there is no connection between this joint surface which is below to the diaphysis. Joint surface is not connected with the upper part of the bone, so it is complete articular. So let's read together. In AO classification, metaphyseal fractures are classified as A type. A type are extra-articular, B type are partial articular, and C type are complete articular. So, in A-type fractures, joint congruity is not an issue as they are extra-articular. Joint congruity is not an issue as such. The principles of mechanical alignment, length rotation need to be considered. Because they are extra-articular and they behave like diaphyseal fractures and they are treated in the same way as diaphyseal fractures, and we only want mechanical alignment because they are not intra-articular and callus won't be the issue there. So what we want to restore? Length, alignment and rotation. Length, alignment and rotation. Fixation of metaphyseal fractures is less predictable with intramedullary nailing. Therefore, plating and screw fixation, yes, because metaphyseal fractures are very near to the articular cartilage, and intramedullary nail may provide less stability to intra-articular fractures, and plate fixation is better, give better result in metaphyseal fracture. So plate fixation, plate and screw fixation is ideal for metaphyseal fractures, yet we can do intramedullary nailing, like we have done in diaphyseal fractures. So metaphyseal fractures are close to the joint, so consideration is given to stable fixation and early joint movement and rehabilitation. As they are close to the joint and we want to move the joint early, so this fixation should also be stable, so that we can move joint early and we can step forward to rehabilitation. So metaphyseal fractures can be extra-articular, partial articular or intra-articular. In extra-articular fractures, we need only mechanical alignment but stable fixation, so that we can have early joint movement and rehabilitation. Plating is best suited to metaphyseal fractures, yet we can do intramedullary nailing. Intra-articular fractures can be type B or type C. Type B are partial articular and type C are complete articular. Okay. This is segmental fracture of tibia, and it has been treated with a long plate in bridging mode. This is also segmental fracture, comminuted segmental fracture of tibia, which has been fixed with unilateral uniplanar external fixator, and this has been treated with Lisrov fixator, and this is the result. And in this result, we have not achieved exact anatomical reduction, but the mechanical axis is okay. Mechanical axis is okay. Like center of the ankle is in line with center of the knee, and this will be in line with the center of the hip. So this alignment is okay, mechanical alignment, mechanical axis is okay, but there is not exact anatomic reduction. This is what we are stressing, that in extra-articular fracture only mechanical alignment is needed. Mechanical alignment is needed in extra-articular fracture, which is done by achieving length rotation, by correction of length, rotation and alignment, by length, rotation and alignment. Okay. So anatomical reduction of the articular surface and rigid stabilization to allow early joint movement and avoidance of degenerative joint disease. In intra-articular fracture, we need exact anatomical reduction so that we can have early joint movement and we can avoid degenerative joint disease. If there is any intra-articular step, if the articular cartilage is not exactly anatomically reduced, there will be friction with every movement of the joint, and that will lead down the road to degenerative joint disease. So, to avoid degenerative joint disease, there should be exact anatomic reduction. So, in osteoporotic bones, intra-articular fractures are considerable challenge. Although anatomical reduction may be achieved, rigid stable fixation devices may cut out of the soft bone, particularly in the metaphysis of the bone where pull-out strength of fixation is reduced. Plate design and the introduction of locking plates. So, In osteoporotic intra-articular fractures, which type of implant we use? Locking plates, osteoporosis locking plates. This is split fracture of lateral condyle of tibia. Split fracture of lateral condyle of tibia. And upon CT scan, there is depression of lateral condyle. There is split depression. There is also split, but also the depression. So we want to restore, this is intra-articular fracture, and we want to restore exact anatomic, want to have exact anatomic reduction. So we will elevate this depressed segment, this depressed portion, we will elevate it. We will elevate it to have exact anatomic reduction, and we would compress this lateral condyle to get some stabilization. So this has been treated with plate fixation, and we can see that there is no exact anatomic reduction, and the lateral condyle has also been compressed with this plate. This is partial articular. This is partial articular, as this part of the joint is not in direct contact with the diaphysis, and this part of the joint is in contact. But here there is no part of the joint in contact with the rest of the bone, because this fracture line separates the intra-articular part from the rest of the bone. This is complete articular, type C. This is type B. Intra-articular, this is type C. So this has also been treated with plate fixation, and the exact anatomic reduction, more or less the exact anatomic reduction has been achieved, but it is not 100%, and it is not possible to achieve 100% in such comminuted fractures, but nearly a good reduction has been achieved. Now moving on to other fractures, coming to the scaphoid fracture. We have discussed that scaphoid is notorious for being a missed injury. Scaphoid fractures are very notorious for being missed because they don't show up early. Most of the time they don't show up early, they show up late after 2 weeks. So blood supply of the scaphoid, it is also unique in its blood supply because it enters from distal to proximal pole, So if this is scaphoid and this is waist, it is proximal pole and it is distal pole. This is scaphoid, this is proximal pole, this is waist, and this is distal pole. So blood supply comes from distal to proximal pole. If it gets fracture at its waist, the blood supply coming from distal pole will be interrupted and the proximal pole will get avascular necrosis, will be avascularly necrosed. So as such, a displaced waist fracture of scaphoid interrupts the blood supply of the proximal pole, leading to avascular necrosis. Okay, and undisplaced fracture of the scaphoid may not be visible on the initial radiographs. Undisplaced fracture is usually notorious for being missed. If a fracture is not evident on the initial radiograph of the patient, and if a fracture is not evident on the initial radiograph and patient is tender in the anatomical snuff box following a fall onto an outstretched hand, special scaphoid view X-ray should be requested. If patient is still painful in anatomical snuff box, scaphoid view X-ray should be requested. If a fracture is not evident on the initial radiographs and the patient remains tender in the anatomical snuff box, then treat as a suspected scaphoid fracture until fracture is actively excluded. If fracture is not evident on the initial radiograph and the patient is still painful, there is still tenderness in the anatomical snuff box, then treat it as a suspected scaphoid fracture. That is treated with POP cast. And an X-ray is repeated after 10 to 14 days. Now, with modalities like CT scan, MRI and bone scan, we can also diagnose early the scaphoid fractures. And if we don't have these facilities, then repeat CT scan after 10 to 14 days. It is treated in below elbow cast, non-operatively. And if it is displaced and unstable, displacement is more than 1 millimeter, then open reduction and internal fixation is done with headless screws, because if we fix it with a screw having head, the head will be prominent and will cause impingement. So it is fixed with headless screw which gets countersunk into the bone, so that there is no impingement or irritation or attrition of the tendons and other structures. Complication of scaphoid fracture are non-union. They are notorious for non-union because of interruption of blood supply, having avascular necrosis, and malunion and carpal instability are its complications. No, carpal instability. Carpal instability includes two things. Number one, lunate dislocation, and number two, perilunate dislocation. The most commonly involved bone is lunate, which is the largest of all carpal bones, lunate. The lunate dislocation is where the lunate bone dislocates out of the radiocarpal joint. Lunate bone dislocates out of the carpus. In perilunate dislocation, lunate remains at its place, but the remaining carpus dislocates or comes out of its location. So in perilunate dislocation, the lunate remains in the radiocarpal joint and the rest of the carpus dislocates around the lunate. Lunate and perilunate dislocations are also very easily missed unless careful attention is paid to the carpal alignment in the lateral radiographs. So to assess for the carpal instability, we must have lateral views of the lateral views. Review of the radiographs should particularly ensure the anatomic location of the lunate in the radiocarpal fossa. In X-rays, we should give particular attention to the location of the lunate in the radiocarpal fossa, and that the capitate in the cup of lunate is maintained, because capitate lies in the cup of the or in the fossa of the lunate. This is fracture of the scaphoid and has been fixed with headless Herbert screw. For carpal instability, what we do? We do closed reduction or open reduction and fix it with K-wires. K-wire fixation is done. K-wire reduction and K-wire fixation, reduction and K-wire fixation, reduction and K-wire fixation. These are images showing carpal instability. This is the radius, this is lunate, and this is capitate. Radiolunate relationship is intact, but capitate and all the other carpal bones have come out of their normal location. So it is perilunate. It is perilunate. It is distal end of the radius and it is lunate. Radiolunate relationship is maintained, but other carpus has come out of its location. Thumb, metacarpophalangeal ulnar collateral ligament. Tear of ulnar collateral ligament is also called gamekeeper or skier's thumb. Skiers or gamekeeper's thumb. Ulnar collateral ligament damage is also called, tear is also called gamekeeper's thumb or skier's thumb. Okay. Owing to unique anatomical arrangement of adductor pollicis, because adductor aponeurosis is also in close association with ulnar collateral ligament, which connects the thumb metacarpal to the first phalanx. And if this ligament gets completely teared, the adductor aponeurosis gets interposed between its two edges and does not allow it to heal. If there is complete tear of the ulnar collateral ligament, adductor aponeurosis gets interposed, and we have only one option to treat it, that is by doing surgery. Because the interposed adductor aponeurosis don't allow the ligament to bone healing. The rupture of the ulnar collateral ligament should be suspected with radial directed. This is mistake in the book, and I have emailed the editors of Bell and Love, and hopefully they will correct it in the next edition. A rupture of the ulnar collateral ligament should be suspected when there is a radial directed force across the metacarpophalangeal joint. Ulnar directed force cause damage to the radial collateral ligament, and radial directed force cause damage to the ulnar collateral ligament. And when there is a complete tear of ulnar collateral ligament of the thumb and adductor aponeurosis gets interposed between them, this is called Stannerlian. And it is treated with surgery. Stannerlian surgery. Okay. Now coming to the distal radius fracture. Distal radius fractures can be extraarticular or intraarticular. Extraarticular fractures are type A fractures. They include Cooley's fracture and Smith fracture. What is difference between Cooley's fracture and Smith fracture? Cooley's fracture, the distal fragment of the radius is displaced dorsally. In Smith fracture, distal fragment is displaced volarly on volar side. Okay. This is a radiograph where this is the radius and this is the distal fragment of the radius which is displaced volarly. So this is Smith fracture, which has been treated with plate fixation, buttress plating. Smith fracture treated with buttress plating. Okay. And if there is intraarticular fracture, that will also be treated with plating and K-wires. Fractures with significant initial displacement on dorsal comminution are at risk of early and late collapse. After thorough counseling, the patient may choose to have the fracture reduced and then held surgically with K-wires, plates and screw fixation or external fixators. K-wires may be placed across the fracture. This is an important concept. K-wires may be placed across the fracture or intrafocally going through the fracture site. This intrafocal concept was given by Kapanji. Let's discuss it. This is fracture of the distal radius, extraarticular fracture. When a fracture occurs, the distal part either tilts towards dorsal, that is Cooley's, or towards volar sides, that is a Smith fracture. And we can, if we are able to reduce the fracture and there is no comminution and the fracture upon reduction is stable, then we can pass K wires from one end to the other end, from in crisscross manner. And if there is some comminution at the fracture side and upon reduction fracture is not stable and we have to provide it a buttress, we will, for example, this distal fragment here at this site is a bone loss. For example, at this site of the radius there is a bone loss and upon reduction this distal part tilts towards this side, then we will pass K wires through fracture site and cross it to the second cortex and leave it outside the bone, and this part of the K wire will provide buttress to the distal radius, which will keep it lifted and won't allow to tilt towards the site where there is comminution and bone loss. So this is intrafocal. This is the type, the diagram shown in B is intrafocal, the A is crisscross. Forearm fractures, radius and ulna fracture. Fractures of the diaphyseal shaft of the radius and ulna are technically, in the anatomical sense of the word, extra-articular fractures. Fracture of shaft of radius and ulna are in typical sense or technical sense they are extra-articular, but they allow pronation and supination at proximal radioulnar joint and distal radioulnar joint, and we want to have this function intact, and they are also considered a joint. So let's see it together. Fracture of the diaphyseal shaft of the radius and ulna are technically, in the anatomical sense of the word, extra-articular. However, the forearm bones work together, being coupled at the proximal and distal radioulnar joints to allow for forearm pronation and supination. Therefore, when considering treatment, the principles that apply to intra-articular fractures need to be considered. So, the fractures of the shaft of the radius and ulna are also considered intra-articular because of this unique phenomena of pronation and supination at the proximal and distal radioulnar joint. If there is fracture of the single bone and it gets shortened because of the bone loss, its relationship with the proximal and ulnar proximal and distal radioulnar joint will get disturbed and both joints will suffer. So we want to restore the exact line rotation of shaft of the radius and ulna. So they are also treated like intra-articular fractures and they are reduced in exact anatomic reduction. So isolated fracture of ulna, so-called green stick fracture, are a little more controversial as non-operative management is possible, but in the location risks delayed union and non-union, hence treatment depends on patient factors. Operative fixation with plate and screw fixation is technically simple and allows early predictable return to function. Now coming to olecranon fractures. Olecranon fractures may be displaced or undisplaced. If it is undisplaced with fracture gap less than 2 mm, then close reduction or non-operative treatment is also possible. And if the olecranon fractures are displaced, then it will be treated with K wires and figure of 8 tension band. Olecranon fractures are treated with K wire and figure of 8 tension band if displaced. Humeral shaft fractures are usually treated non-operatively because gravity assists in its reduction and functional humeral brace is applied, and within 12 weeks 80% of cases gets union. And if there are Open fractures are fractures associated with other injuries, fractures associated with vascular structure damage. Then we do open reduction. A fracture which has failed to unite with the closed method or with conservative method. Internal fixation is needed for displaced intra-articular fractures, non-union, delayed union, open fractures, multiple injuries, and fractures which are not held in acceptable position with brace. These are the indications for open reduction of humerus shaft fracture. Let's repeat again. Displaced intra-articular fractures, non-union, delayed union, open fractures, multiple injuries, fractures not held in acceptable position with brace. We will treat them with open reduction. And what is the method? What are the methods for open reduction? Can be done with intramedullary nail, plate, screw fixation. So, plate fixation is best. Plate fixation is best. Has higher union rates. A radial nerve injury is the most commonly injured nerve with humeral shaft fracture because it is in close contact with the spiral groove of the radius. So, if there is a humeral shaft fracture and there is a concomitant radial nerve injury, we can treat it conservatively and hope for the expectant treatment. But if at the time of humeral shaft fracture, radial nerve was intact and we were applying a cast and radial nerve got injured, then we have to explore it. Radial nerve is the most commonly injured nerve with humeral shaft fracture. Treatment of humeral shaft fracture with a concomitant radial nerve injury remains topical. Most will recover spontaneously. In general, the rule is if the nerve injury occurs at the time of original injury, non-operative treatment is considered, and if occurs after the injury, for example, at the time of brace application, it should be explored. So this is the rule. Fractures of the proximal humerus. There is a classification called Neer classification for proximal humeral fractures. Neer classification which looks at the 4 individual pieces of proximal humerus. 4 individual pieces are the articular head fragment. One is head fragment, then is lesser tuberosity, greater tuberosity, and shaft. Head, lesser tuberosity, greater tuberosity, and shaft, 4 fragments. And upon these 4 fragments, their displacement and angulation, the type of fracture is defined. If a fragment is displaced by more than 1 centimeter and angulated by more than 45 degree in respect of the other fragment, it is considered a part. As such, based on the fracture pattern, it may be undisplaced or in 2 parts, 3 parts, or 4 parts. So, depending upon the fact that if there is any displacement of a fracture fragment and its angulation, the fractures can be divided into undisplaced, 2-part, 3-part, or 4-part fracture of the proximal humerus. Consideration is given to the potential joint dislocation anterior or posterior. The greater the number of parts, the higher chances of interruption of vascularity of humeral head and the more complex the injury. The greater the number of parts, more complex is the injury and more chances of avascular necrosis of the head of the humerus. What are the predictors of avascular necrosis of the head of the humerus? Those are fracture through the anatomic neck, loss of medial hinge, and less than 8 mm of bone calcar along the medial calcar. For example, this is humeral head. This is the anatomical neck, fracture through anatomical neck, and this is the medial This is the medial hinge and this is medial calcar, and this is our medial calcar. If this medial calcar is attached less than 8 mm of medial calcar is attached with the head fragment, it is also a bad prognostic sign and will lead to avascular necrosis. If there is loss of this medial hinge, there will be also chances of avascular necrosis, and if the fracture is through anatomic neck, there will be chances of avascular necrosis. So these are prognostic, these are the predictors of avascular necrosis of humeral head. Okay. Clavicular fractures. Clavicular fractures in the middle third are treated with conservative approach, traditionally non-operatively. Middle third non-operatively. Displaced comminuted fractures show a propensity to be slow to heal. So usually for clavicular fracture there is are treated with polysling and conservative approach, because clavicle is in close contact with neurovascular structures like subclavian artery and brachial plexus, and if we want to apply a plate on the clavicle, then there is chance of any neurovascular damage, so we avoid to apply a plate on the clavicle, and clavicle is usually treated in conservative method by applying polysling for 3 weeks and then active physiotherapy. Proximal femoral fractures. In proximal femoral fracture, blood supply to the femoral head is prime consideration. Blood supply to femoral head, because in femoral neck fracture there can be disruption of the blood supply to the femoral head and it can lead to avascular necrosis of the femoral head. What are the arteries of supplying blood to the femoral head? Those are medial and lateral branches of the deep circumflex femoral artery. Especially medial branch supplies 90% and rest is supplied 10% by lateral. And in children also ligamentum teres artery, which is a branch of obturator artery, and it is usually redundant in adults. So 90% is supplied by medial circumflex femoral artery, 10% is supplied by lateral circumflex femoral artery. What are intra and extracapsular fractures? Intracapsular fractures are fracture of the part of the neck which is intra-articular, and extra-articular are those which are outside of the capsule of the hip joint. So what are the attachments of the capsule of the hip joint? The joint capsule anteriorly inserts along the intertrochanteric line and posteriorly halfway along the femoral neck. Okay, fractures proximal to the hip capsule are intracapsular and those distal to the capsule are extracapsular. Intracapsular fractures are notorious for AVN of the head of the femur because they disrupt its blood supply. Intracapsular fractures are further broken down into whether they are displaced or undisplaced. Undisplaced intra-articular fractures are generally stable and interruption of blood supply to the femoral head is rare. Therefore, treatment is aimed at ensuring that the head fragment does not get displaced during rehabilitation. This can be achieved with cannulated screw fixation. If the intracapsular fractures are undisplaced, we apply cannulated screws for undisplaced intra-articular fracture. And if a displaced intracapsular fracture may cause disruption of the blood supply either through direct injury to the arteries or joint capsule intra-articular hematoma can affect the survival of the femoral head, leading to avascular necrosis. If the patient is physiologically, if there is displaced intra-articular fracture of proximal femur and the patient is young, then we can do open reduction internal fixation. If there is displaced intracapsular fracture of proximal femur and the patient is older, Then we straightforward go with arthroplasty, replacement of joint. This is extracapsular fracture, which is treated with, this is fracture, intertrochanteric fracture along the intertrochanteric line, and this has been fixed with dynamic hip screw. Extracapsular fractures are stable fractures. There is no risk of AVN and they are treated with dynamic hip screw. Extracapsular fractures are treated with dynamic hip screws. Distal femoral fractures are treated with plating. Distal femoral fractures are treated with locking plates. Injury specific locking plates. Patellar fractures, like olecranon fractures, they have the same mechanism. Patella has the same mechanism like olecranon, and they are treated with K wires and figure of 8. K wires and figure of 8 tension band. Figure of 8 tension band if displaced, and if undisplaced and extensor mechanism is intact, then they can also be treated non-operatively with cylinder cast. Non-operatively with cylinder cast if patella is undisplaced and extensor mechanism is intact. If extensor mechanism is damaged and patella is displaced, then it will be treated with K wires and figure of 8 tension band. Femoral shaft fractures are extra-articular fractures. We only need to restore mechanical alignment, and they are treated with intramedullary nails. Tibial plateau fractures are intra-articular fractures, and we want rigid, stable anatomic reduction so that we don't have any later incidence of degenerative joint disease. So they are restored anatomically and fixed with rigid plates and active physiotherapy for rehabilitation. Tibial shaft fractures are extra-articular fractures. And they are treated with intramedullary nails. But intramedullary nail, because intramedullary nail has its entry point at proximal tibia around the knee, so they may cause anterior knee pain. So if the fracture is severely comminuted, then we adopt for plating. Then we can go for plating, and if the fracture of the tibia is open, then we can also apply external fixator. Calcaneal fractures are usually caused by history of fall. Fall causes calcaneal fracture, but we should also rule out lumbar spine fractures with history of fall, because lumbar spine fractures occur in 20% cases with history of fall. Because calcaneum, there is very less blood supply of the skin around it, and it has complications whether we treat it with operative method or non-operative method. Prognosis depends upon how severe the injury to calcaneum is. Talus fractures. Talus consists of head, neck and body. Talus is like scaphoid. If there is fracture, there can be avascular necrosis of the talus, and talar fractures are usually one of the missed injuries. They are usually caused by forced dorsiflexion of forefoot. Also called aviator astragalus. And they are treated with rigid fixation. Because they are intra-articular. Talus articulates with the tibia, with the navicular and with the calcaneum. With the calcaneum at subtalar joint, with the navicular at talonavicular joint, and with tibia at ankle joint. Tarsometatarsal or Lisfranc injury. Lisfranc is the ligament which, this is medial cuneiform, this is middle cuneiform, this is lateral cuneiform, this is cuboid, this is first metacarpal, this is second metacarpal, this is third metacarpal, and this is fourth metacarpal, and this is fifth metacarpal. And the Tarsometatarsal or Lisfranc ligaments connects second metatarsal to medial cuneiform. Second metatarsal to medial cuneiform. Second metatarsal to medial cuneiform. And if this ligament ruptures, there can be gap. And this is midfoot injury. This is midfoot injury. And this needs to be restored. This needs to be treated mostly surgically. But if not so much displaced, can be treated with cast. Injuries to the midfoot are associated with significant morbidity ranging from midfoot sprain to complete rupture of the ligament connecting the forefoot to the midfoot. Injury classically follows forceful plantar flexion. There are two mechanisms of the Lisfranc injury. First is forceful plantar flexion. Forceful dorsiflexion causes fracture of the talus. Forceful plantar flexion causes Lisfranc injury, and also if there is crush injury to the foot. If there is crush injury to the foot, crush injury also causes tarsometatarsal or Lisfranc. Lisfranc ligaments connect the second metatarsal to the medial cuneiform. Poorly treated injuries to the midfoot lead to significant morbidity. If suspected, CT scan of the foot should be undertaken. Treatment options range from closed reduction with plaster cast to open reduction and internal fixation to even fusion of the tarsometatarsal joint. Depending upon the severity of the injury, can be treated closely with cast, can be treated with open reduction internal fixation with K-wires, or we can also do tarsometatarsal fusion if the severity of the injury is too much and we cannot restore articular fragments. Achilles tendon rupture. Achilles tendon causes plantar flexion of the foot and it is a classical history is a feeling of pop, being kicked in the heel and feeling something go. The most common activity leading to Achilles tendon rupture is badminton or squash, and the treatment is by, and diagnosis is by doing clinical examinations, by squeeze testing, that is Thompson test, and by ultrasound, and the treatment is surgical by repair of the Achilles tendon. Treatment is repair of the Achilles tendon.